I was asked to make the introduction for Eileen, possibly because I've known Eileen for a long, long time. We're good friends. But I would say this, she has done a lot of different things in our community for a long, long time, continuously. You know, if she stops doing one thing, she starts doing something else. And I know she's done a lot of things where there's been overlap and things like that. So I just want to say that she has made a huge difference in our community by the service that she's provided over the years. And
Thank you.
you know what I think of her. So, most of you know her best, though, for the things that she's done for the library, but she's done a lot of other things beyond just the library. But I'll talk about the library as well, just because she's done so much in that area. First of all, I don't know if you were here on day one when the library first was established in 1967, but
No,
you were here shortly thereafter.
Yeah.
But she did get on the Allen Library Board in 1975, and then she's been heavily involved with the library, especially since that time period. She is also the first woman city council member. I think that was maybe in the advertisement that went out. So that's a big deal because she broke the barrier for women in municipal government, at least in Allen, if not Collin County. I don't know who all else might have broken that barrier at about that time or not. She has also been involved in many other things. One that I didn't really remember, and I've introduced you before, so I should remember all this stuff. Right? But anyway, she was served on the Collin County Open Space Board in the 1980s. One of the things that was a result of her efforts is that she helped participate in the preservation of some of the Rowlett Creek tributary and stuff like that. If any of you go over to the west side of Allen, south of Bethany, down between the golf course and all of the developments that are south of Bethany, you go from there. Rowlett Creek curves all the way up to 121, and it parallels part of Exchange Parkway through there. If you took a hike through there, you'd be surprised at how great of a trail system and creek tributary that's there. I mean, it's like massive trees. And the neat thing about it is there are a lot of young kids that find out about that, and it becomes a playground for them. You know, it's good because they're out there doing something fun. The bad thing is sometimes they do things that aren't fun all over the creek. So,
No, they're fun. They just shouldn't be doing them.
It's so fun, but, things that they can get in trouble for. And I'm sure many of them have gotten in trouble because of that. And I think I'm going to give a number that when I said that she helped preserve that, it was over 800 acres of that river beltway that she was able to preserve for Collin County citizens as well as people in Allen. She also helped preserve Trinity Trail, which I wasn't familiar with this one, but it's a 25-mile equestrian and hiking path, and that's a pretty big deal. She was also a founding member and first board president of Allen Community Outreach, also known as All Community Outreach at this point in time. She also helped lead efforts to, I'm sorry, I'll go ahead and skip over that. I could go on forever.
You don't have to skip it.
There's so much stuff that she's done. She currently serves I don't know if you're actually serving or you're just a board member emeritus of the Allen Library Endowment.
Right now, I'm emeritus.
But she's also a charter member of that group. And basically, that's a group that took a lot of money that was kind of left over from a previous fundraising effort, and it was kind of rolled over into this endowment. And it started off small. And where are y'all today? What's the number today?
About 570,000.
We started with 170, and now we're at 570.
Yeah, I was thinking like in the 100 and some odd number. But anyway, so it's building up, and we have lofty goals of that, hitting $1 million someday, and it has been able to help a little bit. But when it's small, you tend to want to stay away from it for a little bit until it can get to that point where it's each year you're going to get a significant amount of money that's made off of the investments and everything else that you can start putting that back into investments in the library itself. So anyway, that's one thing that I think is a really big deal. She is also a board member of Connemara Conservancy, that open area over there west of Rowlett Creek. It's actually located in Plano, but a lot of people access it from the Allen side. The really neat thing there that she's proud of is the fact that we saved a lot of the native prairie grasslands there. The Connemara board also actually transplanted native prairie grass there because it was kind of a mix of things, and so that's kind of a big deal. But if you ever go over there, they also added an irrigation system to kind of help keep everything nice and healthy, and they have a lot of beautiful wildflowers. We used to have a lot of events out there. I remember when I first moved to Allen, there were a lot of public events, art shows and other things, and I wish we'd get back to those days.
Well, we're getting back
Do
to
some of
some.
that. So anyway, those are some of the things that she's done. I should have introduced her as Dr. Eileen Thompson because she does have a PhD. She was extremely successful in her vocation, besides all the volunteer activities that she's done in Allen. This past year, though, I would say that because of all of her achievements and accomplishments, she was the recipient of the Allen Kiwanis Club Spirit of Community Award in Allen. So recognize her for that. And so without any further ado, Eileen Thompson.
I was going to add a couple of things. Years ago, I saw it, I was in the planner for Allen in those days, and I saw in other communities how developers would come into town and rip on all the trees. And they always said, well, we're going to plant some new ones. And as soon as they built their buildings, they were gone and never returned calls when you ask them where those trees are. So I recognized the need for us to have a tree preservation ordinance. Well, at the time, there was concern that that would stop development in Allen. Well, you can tell today that the tree preservation ordinance has not stopped development now in Texas. But there were only two people, there were maybe a handful of people in those days that were doing had the political strength, will, and perseverance to make sure we had a tree preservation ordinance. And both of them are right here. And I cannot tell you how many trees in Allen owe their lives to these two. And except for that statement, and other open space that was preserved that in Allen, Texas, parkland, much of that, I can tell you, I can go back to the records and tell you a lot of parkland, a lot of trees, a lot of open space is a result of these two. So I think it was only fitting that he introduced Eileen.
Thank you.
Shall we say Dr. Tollett,
Yeah, that's good.
who taught anthropology at UTD and amongst all the other things she's done. Dr. Tollett.
Thank you. Well, Tom asked me to come tonight and talk to you mostly about when I was the first woman on the council. But
Can you all hear okay?
I talk pretty loud. But I wanted to talk first about what Allen was like when I first came here. I met my husband, Bill, and married and moved in 1969. I was a whopping 22-year-old, and he was twice my age. And Jim can tell you, I was the talk of the neighborhood. Everybody didn't know what in the world was going on. But we lived in a wonderful neighborhood. Chuck and Ada Williams, I hope you remember. Wilma and Mickey and J.C. Smith. June and Raymond Snoddy. Carolyn and Jim, me and Bill. At that time, I was the youngest one by 10 years. I'm the only woman of those still alive. So, it's been a while. I also wanted to talk a little bit about what Allen was like then. There basically wasn't much Allen except Main Street with the businesses, the train station. There were a few houses in the downtown area. And then there was our neighborhood, which is Watson, Ellis, Allenwood, Cedar, that. And that was really about all there was. There was a bank. There was Ms. Mosley's grocery store, which was on the corner over here. It wasn't over there. It was on the corner. And the drugstore, the lumber yard, the Baptist church, the Church of God, a couple of service stations, post office, and the old schoolhouse. And that basically was Allen. And there was no place to go out to eat. You had to go to McKinney or Plano or Richardson because there wasn't any place here. And our neighborhood, basically, besides the downtown, was Allen. There was, when you drove, what is now Greenville Highway 5 was the highway. And when you drove south from McKinney, you knew when you were almost home because there was one light. Not stoplight, one light that you saw when you got just about to what is now Stacy Road. And you'd say, okay, we're in Allen. There was a light. There were no stoplights. There were stop signs, but no stoplights. Tom wanted me to talk about some of the characters. I will only talk about two. One, I will not mention his name. He is no longer with us. I don't think he has any family here, but I will not mention his name. He pictured himself, imagined himself as the town sheriff. And when he'd had a bit much to drink, he would get in the middle of Main Street and direct traffic. All three cars of it, but he would direct traffic. And everybody just said, well, that's him, just let him go, until one day he decided that he needed to do that with a gun. And then he had to be stopped. The other was, I did not know him much at all. But one day, here I'm this little 22-year-old, I'm in Ms. Mosley's grocery store buying my groceries, and I hear this noise coming from the back of the grocery store. And I go to the back because I'm curious, and here's this big old man just raking cans of chicken broth off the shelves, just by the armload into his cart. Liz, damn it, I told you if you'd order this by the case, I'd buy them by the case instead of having to do it. And I thought, oh my God, who is this man? It scared me to death. Well, I ended up in the checkout line right behind him. And he's counted, the poor clerk has to count how many chicken broth cans have you got. And he said, well, that'll be so much. And he handed him a $1,000 bill. I'd never seen a $1,000 bill. And I looked and I even counted 1, 2, 3, yeah, that, so, and I turned my cart and I went running to the back and I said, Miss Mosley, that man's paying for his groceries with a $1,000 bill. She said, well, he always does. I said, what? She said, don't you know who that is? And I said, no. She said, have you ever heard of Alice Chalmers Farm Equipment? And I said, well, yeah. She said, that's Louis Alice. He's one of Allen's millionaires. And I thought, Allen has millionaires? I didn't know they had any millionaires. But she said, no, his family lives up north. They don't want him up there. So every 3 weeks, they send him a check for $1,000, and he goes to the bank, gets a $1,000 bill, and then he goes and buys his groceries and does stuff. And I said, okay. So those were two of the characters. I grew to admire greatly Liz Mosley. She was a marvelous businesswoman. Ed Ling, I'm going to tell a story on Jim. Ed, this is how everybody knew everybody. There were only maybe 750 people here. And when Ed was going to be out of town, like Jim or whomever he knew might need something while he was gone, he'd just give him a key to the lumber yard. And then when he got back, he'd let you know you were back and you'd give him the key back. He never sent out bills. He'd just call you and say, I need a little money. How much do you owe me? And then you'd go down and you'd pay him. And then Square and Dale Hope. Square owned one of the service stations downtown. His real name was Virgil, but everybody called him Square because he was, and Dale had one of the most marvelous collections of Indian jewelry, and I was really into that, and oh God, she had a wonderful collection. Well, one day when we'd been married about 3 years, I'd gotten a 3-speed bicycle. And I rode it all over town to get my groceries, check the mail, do whatever, and one day I realized my tire was low. Well, I thought, I've seen people fill up car tires with air, so I went to Squares, And I said, how do I fill up my, where's the air? And they said, well, it's out there, so and so. I said, okay. And I thought, well, it would be nice if somebody would come out here and offer to, but they were just standing in there watching me. Well, I knew to take the cap off, and so I put the thing down, and I air, and I air, and I air, and I air, and then my tire blew up. And they just all stood in there and laughed, and then Square finally came out and said, do you want me to get my truck and take you and your bicycle home? I said, no, I'll walk it. But he was a great man. I loved him. 3 people I came to absolutely love. Walter Curtis, who was the town tax collector, and he was an old country gentleman. I just adored Walter. I never heard him say a bad thing about anybody. I never heard him raise his voice. He was born on the exact same day as my husband, Bill. But he died before he was 70. Bill lived almost 92. The other was Wilma Mickey Smith. She lived across the street. She was called Mickey because when she was a little girl, she always wore a sweater with Mickey Mouse on it. So everybody just started calling her Mickey. She worked at TI, high up in TI. And the other was Ms. McDermott. I didn't meet her for maybe the first 5 or 6 years I was here, but then I got to know her. What a wonderful woman she was. When she told you off, she could tell you off, and there was no doubt in your mind. She only did that once to me, but whew. But she was the sweetest, most generous lady I almost ever met. I adored her. My first volunteer efforts, I had been told by my mother-in-law, who was 80-something years old, that I should stay home and have babies. Well, after about 2 months, I was so bored, I was about to climb the walls. And Mickey realized that and said, why don't you go down? We've started a library. And you can go down to the Woodmen of the World building, and people have donated books, and you can go down there and help us get them out of the boxes and record them and put them on the shelves. I said, that'll be great. So I went down, and that was how I first got involved with anything. Mickey, Wilma Smith, the sorority had done a library. Most of it was Ruth Pringle. She wanted a library. We didn't have a city library for several years after that, but this was just a group of women, and the Woodmen of the World let them have the top floor of the building, and so that was our first library. Then, let me see, I got on the library board, ACO, Open Space, Heard Museum, Connemara, now just I'm on the ALEF, and I'm chair of the steering committee for the library expansion that we're going to be doing in the next couple of years. Then Tom said they're going to hear about you being the first councilwoman. I had gone for the last 6 hours of my master's degree to the very first UN Conference on Human Environment and Population in Stockholm, Sweden. Got my last 6 hours of my master's over there. So I had been very conscious of environment. And I became concerned because Allen had little or no building codes, particularly for residential building. And that was the reason I ran for council. I wanted closer together studs, I wanted more insulation, this kind of thing. I never got it, but that was the reason that I ran. I served on the council with wonderful men. Frank Duggar was the mayor. I loved Frank. Mickey Pearson, H.C. Brooks, Bob Lohman, and Charlie Chandler, just recently passed away. He and I were elected at the same time. Our very first meeting, Allen was still on well water. And we at that point, this was in 1976, and we at that point were up to about, 3,000 people. And we knew the time was coming when we weren't going to be able to get enough water out of that well to stay on well water, and that we'd have to go and be a customer of the North Texas Municipal Water District. But in order to edge into that, we decided, or it had already been decided, and at mine and Charlie's first meeting, we were going to raise the water rates. Now, they had not been raised in 10 or 15 years. It was a riot, literally a riot. We were in the little city hall. People were raising the windows and crawling in through the windows, knocking chairs over, screaming at us, throwing things, banging on the walls. And finally, Frank looked up and he said, "I think we need to call a recess. And we're going to move this meeting outside because y'all are going to tear this room up if we don't." So, I thought, what in the world have I gotten myself into? So we moved outside, we moved the microphones, the tables, and so forth, but the police chief at that time was standing around, you'll excuse my language, he was kind of standing around and, well, I'll pick up a chair, and finally Frank looked and he said, "Anthony, what in the hell are you doing in here?" And he said, "Well, I was just going to help y'all move stuff." He said, "Get out there and look for snipers." So that was my first council meeting. On my second or third, we were about to vote for Allen's first cul-de-sac. I didn't know what one was. So I went in, and we'd kind of gather in the office or whatever before council meetings, and I do not remember who it was. But I turned to someone and said, "We're supposed to vote on a cul-de-sac, on this zoning." "Yes." I said, "What's a cul-de-sac?" And the answer was, "It doesn't matter, just vote for it." Now, those of you who know me can imagine how well that went over. But I realized right then that I was the little girl. I wasn't the first woman on the council. I was the little girl. I was barely 29, and I was the little girl. And that taught me very quickly that if I was going to be anything other than that, I had to read every word of our packet. I had to know more about what we were doing than the men did, and then I could be the woman on the council. I wanted to be one of the guys, but I knew that wasn't going to happen. So that was what I trained myself to do. And Joe Farmer to this day says Eileen read every word. I had to. I had to know more than they did about what we were doing. And pretty soon, within a few months, we'd walk in and they'd say, "Eileen, what's this we're working on tonight?" And then I was one of the guys. The next year, Bob Lohman decided not to run for re-election, and Frank called, and we got Joe Farmer. I loved Frank. I loved Charlie. I love Joe Farmer. He was so fun. He was as lost as Charlie and I had felt, and I guess every councilman feels when they first get on the council. But it was kind of And after we'd get through with meetings, well, either Joe and I'd go somewhere and have coffee, or go to H.C. Brooks's house and have coffee and this kind of thing. The one thing I came to realize was that I could, if I knew I was going to lose a vote, I knew I was the only one going to vote against it. At that time, and I don't know, Dave, can you still do it? If you abstained from a vote,
No,
you could say why you were abstaining.
only if you're personally tied to that project, then you can, but
Well, then, if you abstained, you could explain why you weren't going to vote. If you voted no, you just voted no. So I abstained quite a few times because then I could just ram my foot through whatever I wanted to run it through, that if I said no, nobody would have known what I thought. Some of the fun things, we started planning for our ultimate growth. We knew exactly how big Allen could be, and we thought our build out would be 30,000 people. And we started planning for that. Our whole city budget was about $125,000. One night, we had a new Allen Sports Association, and the president of that came to ask for part of the budget. They wanted to put in ball fields and all sorts of stuff. And if we would just give them $100,000, they could do it. Well, Frank said, that's almost our entire budget. How about we give you 20? And I think that's about, something like that. That's what we did. Let me see, there was one more. Oh, one of the things that we knew we had to do, and it was the going thing, was a siren system, a warning system. So we sent the assistant police chief. We had 2 policemen, and all the firemen were volunteer. We had maybe 3 or 4 city employees, that's it. The rest, everybody else just did. But we sent the assistant police guy over there, the one of 2, to DFW because they were having this big meeting about the area siren system. They were going to put this all over North Texas. And I think we were going to get 2 or 3. Well, he reported back to us. We were all sitting there. And he was explaining all that was said at the meeting about the sirens and how they would work and how they would be put up. And this would be a warning signal. So that when the Russians were coming, we would all get in our cars and drive to DFW and get on planes and fly somewhere safe. And I got the giggles. And I tried not to. I didn't want to laugh at the man, but I couldn't help it. I got the giggles so bad. I finally had my head on the council table like this. And Frank said, "Eileen, what is so funny?" And I looked up and I said, "Wendell," it was Wendell Housley, so "Wendell," and he said, "Yeah." I said, "When the Russians are coming, the sirens will go off?" And he said, "Yep." I said, "We'll all get in our cars and drive to DFW." "Yep." "We're going to get on planes." "Yep." I said, "Wendell, where are we going to go?" Well, then everybody realized how absurd that was, and that kind of put a stop to it. We did go ahead and get in the siren system, but we were doing it for storms, not for when the Russians were coming. Like I said, I didn't get the vote I wanted. I wanted desperately to have tighter building restrictions, building codes. I couldn't get it. For some people in town, that was considered a threat. Would have cost them more to build houses. I was a little bit ahead of my time because a lot of what I was after is now in the building codes. But that was it. It was fun. Thank you.
I might add that that was 76 to 78. Mm-hmm. We did have the building codes by the mid-80s, but the then builders, I won't say all of them, but most of them, thought of this as it's going to ruin their business. Mm-hmm. Well, the problem is, without adopting we went on to a national building code system. The problem is when you have fires, and because the electrical system or the plumbing, the hot water heaters were not placed right, somebody had to pay for that. And it wasn't the builder. And so what she did was, she planted the seeds. And it took 6 or 7 years. But people started thinking, you know, really, we ought to do that.
Yeah.
So it was about 7 years.
Yeah. Oh, and one thing we did get while I was on the council, we got our first stoplight. We had to get Ray Roberts, who was our congressman, to go to Congress and get permission for us to have a stoplight down at Greenville and McDermott. That was our first stoplight. But we got that. Yeah. And it was a flashing light then. But we got one.
And it stayed the only stoplight for about 5 years. The second one was at Bethany and Highway 5, which was about 1985. That gives you perspective. 2 stoplights. You know.
Well, everything west of basically downtown was farms. And most everything east of Highway 5 was farms. Now there did get to be some growing. Y'all had the airfield, and you know there were some things. And by the time I was on the council, there were a few houses being built up on the north end. That's where Edling and the Holtz and all it gradually built. And over where Joe Farmer lives, over on Pimblebrook, that began to be built. But there just was not, the library at that time was in the little blue house. And Mary Soom was our librarian. Mr. and Ms. Mack had built the fire station and the city hall for the city. That was their gift to the city. And that was where we had our meetings. But other than with churches and one, I think there was only one bank. There was a cleaners, there was a drugstore, and the little corner. Okay, if you go Main Street, not this first cross street, but the second one that you can turn and go to the library. Right there on the, let me get my directions, southeast corner is this little bitty open building kind of thing. That was the jail. That was the police station and the jail. And one night, one of my husband's co-workers had flown in, and he had a few on the plane, and he was going to come see us, and he had called and said, I've just flown in, I want to come visit. We said, okay, fine. Well, he didn't come. Well, I got scared. I was afraid maybe, because I knew he'd drink on the plane, and I was afraid he'd had a wreck. Well, finally the phone rang. Eileen, yeah, this is John. Yeah, I've been arrested. I didn't stop at a stoplight there at Cedar, come into your house, and the police caught me, so I'm in jail because I've been drinking. I said, well, I'll come down and get you. No, just let me sleep it off. I'll see you tomorrow. But that was the jail. There was one cell in there. He almost made it. He wasn't far.
Is this the Mexican restaurants thing? That Cinderbox?
No, this is, I don't know what it is.
It was a travel agency at one point, but that was the city jail. It was about a fourth of the size of this building.
Because I thought that's the place that used to be La Finca and everything.
No. That was the post office.
That was the post office, yeah. That was our second post office. Yeah, when Jim and I first, when we moved here, there was a little bitty post office. And then we got the big post office, which is La Finca, or what was La Finca. And Bill Enlow, who eventually was our neighbor, was the postmaster. And he did not take anything off anybody. If a piece of mail got in the wrong box, there was all hell to pay. And he ran that thing like he was a Marine, and he ran it like the military. But it was we didn't have delivery then. You had to go to the post office to get your mail. One of the things we worked on when I was on the council was we realized we were going to have to go to more automation. as far as water bills. And everybody went to City Hall to pay their water bill because then you could visit with everybody. You know, you didn't mail yours in, you'd go and visit. But we knew we were having to go to more automation on that kind of thing.
For years, people would come down to the City Hall, pay their water bill, and each one would say the same thing: save 25 cents. And I mean, it'd be raining outside. Save 25 cents. And they'd walk from downtown. But it took me a while to realize they're not here to save 25 cents. It's party time, because they run into other friends, other people. And City Hall was kind of the second, that was their party time. Does anybody have any questions? Now, I will repeat the question for the cameras so we can hear it. Yes?
I wanted to know if she knew anything about the time capsule that was buried.
Do you know
Yeah.
anything about the time capsule that was buried at the fire station?
Yes, I do. It was gradually, somehow it got damaged and everything that was in it was ruined. But there was a flag, as I remember. I'm not sure I remember exactly what was in there, but I know there was a flag and a couple of other things, and it was buried right there in a little square thing, and somehow we had some kind of flood and it got ruined. It had not been sealed correctly and it was ruined.
So there wasn't a replacement.
No, not as far as I know. Not as far as I know.
Any other
Fire
questions?
station on McDermott,
Yes.
not McDermott, but
Yeah,
Blue
yeah,
House.
Blue House Fire Station, City Hall, which is now
And
storage.
library.
Yeah,
And-
and there was a library in the back at one time.
Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to ask too about the railroad. The train didn't stop anymore unless it was waiting on another train to pass.
Yeah.
But was the Southern Pacific, do you recall issues with the Southern Pacific line coming through town? Or
There
Whoa,
weren't
whoa.
many because there.
She's asking questions about the Southern Pacific and issues regarding traffic.
Well, it was hard to get across because there weren't really good warning signs. That was one thing we got, was warning signs. There were so few, it came through so seldom that it wasn't really a problem that much. I don't remember, Tom, I don't remember anybody ever getting hurt by a train, but I'm not sure.
Well, I can tell you one story. This happened about 1985 or 6. A semi truck full of gasoline was crossing down here at right here, and the engineers on the train realized there was going to be a collision, so they jumped out, and the train collided with the truck. And amazing! It was amazing. All the gas leaked out, and there was no
No fire.
explosion. The only people hurt were the engineers because they jumped out and both of them broke their legs. And now, I do recall that during the lunch hour, we had to plan our lunch hour around the trains because we had real strict lunch hours. You had to be in your chair at 1 hour and 1 minute. So sometimes those trains would take 20 or 30 minutes. And they weren't supposed to take but 10, but nobody policed them. I think there was a rule that they couldn't block more than 10, 15 minutes, but they didn't care. And as I recall, we tried to time the trains when they would come so that we would not be caught. Because the one little burger house was, the Dairy Queen, or there was something down, I forgot. We just didn't want to be caught on the train, so we timed them one time. They came at 1:10, so we made sure we got back in the office by 1 o'clock, something like that.
By the mid to late 70s, we had finally a couple of places to eat. Gentry Steakhouse. Gentry Jones had been one of the mayors, and he built Gentry Steakhouse. And then we got the Royal Drive-In up at the end of, what is that, Allen Drive or Allen? And so we had two places we could eat if we wanted to go out. And then eventually we got the Dairy Queen. But that was about And you could go to Liz's, you could go to Ms. Mosley's, and they'd make you a sandwich, you know, but there wasn't really any place to go out to eat.
Yes, ma'am.
When you were talking about build out at 30,000, what were you considering the city limits? Like
Well,
Greenville,
we already had, you already had it already set extraterritorial jurisdiction, which ours was, I think, at that time, it may be a little less now, but at that time it was either 32 or 33 square miles. That was all we had. The rest was going to be Plano, McKinney, Frisco, whatever. This was our area. And we thought that if we got to 30,000, we would be doing really great.
So you
Well,
already had like where we
Yeah,
are.
yeah, the extraterritorial jurisdiction was already set.
I forgot to ask the question for the camera. She asked about
The city limits.
the city limits. If I might add, the idea in those days, this is in the 70s, the big thinking was that people were going to have 2-acre kind of ranch estates, and there would be no apartments. It would all, because there were so many of those sprouting up, these 2-acre, 5-acre ranch estates throughout so the thinking was, well, that's how Allen's going to look like. So yeah, 30,000. Well, that by 10 years later, build out was about 100,000 because we quickly realized it was probably going to be 5 units to the acre, and now, of course, much higher than that because of all the apartments that have come in. But
also, the west side started developing eventually. Square Holt died, and Dale sold some of their land. And, you know, so some of the land that had been owned, Louis Alice died, Mr. Green. I think Ms. Mac never sold hers. They had 600 acres, and she never sold hers. But a lot of that land on the west side started developing, but we thought that would be the 2-acre ranchettes. You know, we just didn't dream that it would be what it is now. Certainly, we didn't see there'd be any retail over there. You know?
can you elaborate on what Mrs. McDermott did for Allen, Texas?
Oh, good gracious. Mr. and Ms. Mack, she told me once that they had been looking for a country place, and they'd drive the back roads wherever, and they happened to drive up into what is their property, and she saw all the wildflowers. Ms. Mack loved wildflowers, and she said, Jean, this is it. This is where we're going to buy it. They bought 600 acres. They built their house on it. He designed and basically built the house. They, like I said, gave the city, the fire station, the city hall. They very quietly, Ms. Mack never made a big deal about what she gave. She gave lots of money. She loved libraries. And Barbara Bueller used to tell the story about this little lady came in at Christmas and just looked around. Miss Barbara didn't know who she was. And she looked around the Blue House. And then she said, well, it's been very nice to meet you. Good luck. Hope you do well. And handed Barbara a check. And I think Barbara told me it was for $10,000, which back then was a lot of money.
It'd be 100,000 today.
And just walked out. And she looked and saw Mrs. Margaret McDermott. You know, she went by his name because that's what the women of that generation did. It wasn't Margaret McDermott. But she very quietly gave fire trucks, lots of money to the library, parks. After Ms. Mack died, I guess some people here know, Mary had some of the city people out for lunch. And at the end of lunch, she said, Mother wanted me to do this. And she handed checks to Jeff Timms, $200,000 for the library. Chief Harvey, $300,000 for the police. John Boyd, $300,000 for the fire. and Tim Dentler $1 million for the parks. Chief Harvey said $1.8 million at a lunch, but that was just the way they were. She, you know, they meant to do good. And she was good to me. She was good to my daughter. When Casey went to Hockaday, the first summer that we sent her to summer school, Ms. Mack called me. She said, Casey gonna go this fall? I said, well, I think we're going to let her. She said, well, they tell me they're afraid she might have a little problem because she's a little behind. Well, that didn't hit me real well. And I said, Ms. Mack, most of the girls she's going to be competing with have been in private school all their lives. She's been in public school. She'll be all right. She said, do you think you're going to let her go? I said, yes, ma'am. We're trying to work it out. She said, there's a $5,000 check sitting in the headmistress's office to help pay her tuition. And that was just the kind of thing that she did. And she never said a word to anybody that she had done that. And she'd say, and you keep that to yourself.
To follow up on that, several times people would call me and they wanted to do a story like the morning news on what Mrs. Mack had done for Alan. They had heard that she had done this, that, or the other, and they would call me for information. And this is my standard answer. I said, I'm sure she appreciates the interest, but I guarantee you and promise you, she will not participate in this story whatsoever, however, and won't even acknowledge the gift. She said she won't. I said no. I said, in fact, she doesn't even like to have her picture taken. If you'll notice these pictures, like at the McDermott Bridge down in Dallas, she gave the money for the McDermott Bridge, that beautiful that Santiago Calatrava built. There's no picture of her in the bridge. It's a group of people and the bridge. She was 100 years old when that bridge was dedicated. And she would get very angry if anybody put her name associated with a gift. And the only reason people found out about gifts because it would be public record if they gave.
One time, she had asked me and Joe Farmer and Mickey, maybe one other person, out for lunch. We were sitting there, and Joe had his arm around Miss Mack, and they were just visiting. And so
Eileen, you don't want to tell that one.
and he looked at me, he said, take our picture. Well, I had my camera with me, so I just very quietly got up and went over and got my camera and snapped. Oh my God, she looked at me and she said, don't you ever do that again. And I said, excuse me. And she started in on me to the point that Joe said, Ms. Mack, I asked Eileen to do that. She said, okay, but don't ever take my picture without telling me you're going to. Yes, ma'am. I mean, no matter what Ms. Mack said, it was just, yes, ma'am.
When I first started working for the city, my father told me not to ever take her picture, or at all, and don't ask to be taken and have a picture with her and so forth. And so for the 50th anniversary of the library in 2017, I wanted to interview her about her contributions to the library. And I knew the answer was going to be not only no, but no. But I had to go through the motions. So I wrote her a letter and told her what I wanted. And it would be a film interview. And I knew that the answer was going to be no. And then I get this letter from her, and I was opening it up, and I knew she was going to be tactful how she said no. She said, you have 1 hour to interview me, and all questions have to be approved before. And I was just shocked. That was the only time I've ever heard that she's got very few footage of her being interviewed ever. I mean, ever. And she was 105 when I interviewed her. And mind was good, her body was gone, but her mind was razor sharp. And she talked about she and Jean would ride on horseback all throughout Allen because nobody cared that you rode, as long as you didn't mess with their crops. They didn't care if you rode through their pastures. It was not a big deal. And she also said to me that, I reminded her of a story about 1989. I got this call from somebody who lived on the west side, and they said that they thought there was a drug bust going on of some sort on the McDermott Ranch, and she wanted to let me know, like, I'm not the police, but people have always called me whenever they thought there was a problem. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And so I knew what the situation was, but I wasn't going to acknowledge it. But the day before, the Secret Service had called and wanted to make an appointment with me. And I went, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. And so they came by and they said, we want a temporary use permit to land a helicopter on Mrs. McDermott's property. And I gave, it's what we'll call, I don't know what it's called now, but it was called temporary use permit in those days. And I thought, Secret Service landing on Mrs. McDermott's property. And I put bingo. It was Mrs. Lyndon Johnson. And she would come up every year during the spring. Early in the morning, the helicopter would fly in from Austin, land on Mrs. McDermott's place. They'd have lunch. They'd walk around the wildflowers. That was the main reason. And that stand of wildflowers is the only native stand of wildflowers in Collin County. And it has since grown. They've let it grow a little bit. But that's...
One of the first times our son-in-law came, he and Casey weren't married yet, and Ms. Mack wanted all of us to come out to dinner. Well, Casey was being polite, and she said, Ms. Mack, where have you been lately? Where have you been traveling? And she said, well, Lady Bird and Liz Carpenter and I rented a castle in Scotland, and Derek went, and she said, only for a week, that's all we could afford. And Derek was just, But they'd gone over there just to stay at the castle for a week because a week was all they could afford. But, you can imagine this kid from New Hampshire, going, Lady Bird. But yeah, she was really special. She really was.
One of the things that the McDermotts, as a matter of policy, she would get her hair done in Allen. They would buy their groceries in Allen. And Mr. Mack had this policy, when you're in Rome, you live like the Romans. Can you elaborate on that?
I first met Ms. Mack when I was at Marie Burton's, getting my hair fixed. And every week, every Monday before she went back to Dallas for the week, Ms. Mack would go to Marie's and she would fix her hair. Well, we just happened to cross one day, and Marie introduced us, and that was how I met Ms. Mack. But that was what you did, and you lived, and I know I've seen, one day, sometimes you could get through the gates, and just driving around was Steve Terrell. And he said, well, Miss Mack, I just came to check on you. Well, fine, so on. And every day until she was 99 years old, I know, she either walked for an hour on the farm or she swam for an hour in the pool. Every day. And that was how she stayed like she was. She was great. Mm-hmm.
So where exactly is the 600 acres? Is that like McDermott South?
If you go McDermott West, okay, and eventually, is there a golf course or something there on the right? What is it? And you go kind of down, and there's a creek, and there's a bridge, and then you see kind of a gated area there. That's the McDermott property.
It's very narrow, and it's very unassuming. You wouldn't think that
she wouldn't have had a big fancy.
600 acres is a lot of land, so it's not.
Yeah, and bless her heart, when she died, the city got 105 of that for a park.
And I will have to say that part of very few people know this, but Allen has one of the very few original stands of trees, original native stands of trees in all of North Texas, because it was all mowed over by either developers or farmers to plant crops. And there's probably about 150 acres of native trees where the plow has never touched. Down at the Trinity River, down in South Dallas, is one of those 4. One is in Garland, there's another one. But now we have the smallest of the stand. But one reason it was never touched by the plow, because I'd asked the farmers, how come y'all never, he said, flooded too much. You know, Square told me it flooded too much and to ever farm it. So combined with what was there with Miss Max, it's an incredible sight to see, to go walk. You can walk through some of it today, not all of it. Some of it's still sealed off, but you can walk through there. Just make sure you're stepping on over a stick and not a copperhead. Because I have done that. They're out there. I thought it was a stick and it was a copperhead.
That's the trees in Sun Creek, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I would like to rename that for Mrs. McDermott, call it the McDermott Forest. I'd like to call it McDermott. Right now, see, the developer named it himself to promote his development over there, which is fine, but Miss Mac now has given probably half of that area. And about 40 years ago, we had the Texas A&M Forestry come out and do an evaluation, and some of those trees over there are 150 years old. 150 years old.
We have a tree on Connemara that's on the creek. We've had it dated. That tree is over 250 years old. And, Jim?
Jim?
Yeah, this is tall grass prairie, all the land down here. There's more trees in Allen than ever had. Because the only trees that were around were along the creek bank.
They're looking for you.
Because it was prairie.
Tall grass prairie.
Most of us taught, what he was saying is, for the camera, most of Allen was, because there's Blackland Prairie is what it's called. And the black land was perfect for tall grasses, which is perfect for crops. And that's why the settlers, when they arrived in Allen, they were riding their kinfolks to get down here quick because the corn grows taller than they were. Any questions?
Do you know anybody that, when the post office closed down the one in the little square building, that ended up with a post office box?
Do you know who had ended up at the post office box where it landed?
No,
Just, like,
No,
we would
I-
love to have a box.
I don't know.
You know Deborah. By the way, Miss Mac's house was designed by O'Neill Ford, the famous architect. And then the house that her ancestors lived in 100 years ago recently won, just like our barn won the historic award, that house won the other award for Collin County. And I did not advertise that because I could still think of Miss Mac saying, don't you dare
Don't you dare.
promote anything about what we do out here.
Later on, she had to put a new roof on the house. Somebody talked her into making it an all copper roof. She said, Eileen, I paid more for that roof than we paid for 600 acres of land.
Another conversation starter. When I first met Eileen, it was in 1984, and the Friends of the Library were having a book sale out on the front porch of then the Blue House. And the front porch was about the size of this table here. And they were boasting how well they did. They sold $33 to help with the library. And now I think we sell about $100 a day.
I'm not sure, but it's all the difference in the world. We thought we were doing great when we had 104 books. I mean, we just thought it was wonderful.
Last little Miss Mac story, although you can keep talking about it.
No.
But she, this is 1984, 85. Maria Tinkle, who was the widow of then Lon Tinkle, who was a longtime professor at SMU. He'd written a number of books on Texas history and so forth. She was getting low on cash, and so Mrs. Mack had a policy. She didn't necessarily, she didn't want anybody, like we said, she didn't want anybody to know what she did. So she had offered to, and I don't know that this would be ethical now, but this is how we did it. She had offered to buy the books from Mrs. Tinkle and give them to the Allen Public Library, but she needed to have them appraised so she could get the tax write-off. Mrs. Mack, we're talking about books enough to fill this room here, and Mrs. Mack didn't own the books more than 1 second because as soon as the books left Mrs. Tinkle's house, they came to the Allen Public Library, and that really was the first serious big collection that the library had.
What year was that?
About 83, 84. Yours truly did the appraisal. And I knew Mrs. Tinkle's circumstances, so I didn't charge her anything. But it was interesting, all these books coming up to the library. And we were talking about boxes and boxes. And then for the next 15 years or so, those books constituted a big chunk of the library. So Mrs. McDermott, the reason I brought the story up, every time you turn around, there was something she did to help the library. And in those days, those books were just everything. And, the last time I saw one of the books in the library was about 15 years ago. You got a question?
When was the new library built? The one where the police station or the Parks Department is now? When was that built?
Okay.
Oh, I did the speech when we did the groundbreaking, 87?
I want to say 87 or 88.
Yeah, I think 87 or 88. And Gail Boone, bless her, I loved Gail, was the president of the library board at that time, and I was the vice president. Gail was supposed to do that speech, and she got sick and was in the hospital. So they called and said, Eileen, you have to do it. And so I did an almost ad lib groundbreaking speech. And but Ms. McDermott would come and just walk through the library and she never, very unassuming, and then lay a check and, it was just that kind of thing. But that was the 87, I'm pretty sure it was 87, Paul.
It took about a year to build. Then we stayed there for about 18 years. And then this building was built in 2005.
And I was on one of the committees for the 2005 with Vern Lahart. Some of you may remember, he was head of DLM, and Jackie Evans. And I thought of that when I got word that Jackie had died, because one night we were acting silly. And we were, we'd gotten through with our business, and we were talking about, my next husband, my next wife, just acting silly. And Jackie had said something, and I said, my next husband has to love to dance, and he can't snore. and Jackie looked at me, and he said, you don't ever want to get married again, do you? But he had such a wonderful sense of humor, and you know, so we had a good time with that bond.
Were you around when Barney visited the library?
Oh yeah.
Tell us about
I
that.
was not there, but DLM had this little character named Barney, the dinosaur, and so he
The
went,
dinosaur.
the dinosaur, and he, the purple dinosaur, and he went to the library. I was not there that day, but
Well, see, Barney was born in Allen, and about 1990 or something like that, I had reason to go visit DLM on business, city business, and they asked me if I would like to see where Barney lives. Well, being a Texas gentleman, I said yes, but not down deep. Who's Barney? You know, I said, oh sure, I'd love to see where Barney lives. I thought, who in the world is Barney? And I was clueless about. Ask me about ancient culture, we can talk. What's happening today, I don't know. And so they took me to this room, which was about a fourth of the size of this room, and it was lined with rocks and there's sand on the floor. And I thought, am I supposed to be impressed? And so I smiled and I said, thank you, and left. And I came home and I came back to the office and I said, does anybody know who Barney is? You don't know who Barney is? And that's where Barney, the story of Barney began. And so it was a big plus for the library because they allowed Barney to. Now it's a little later. You had to pay like $50,000 to ask Barney to come see you, but this was a big money raiser for the library in those days. Was Barney? I mean, it raised a lot of money, and it was thanks to DLM and Donna Van Noos.
yeah, oh yeah, Donna Van Noos, yeah, who's no longer with us either. But one of the fun things when we were building the new library, we got to work with Barbara on what furniture were we going to put in there and what would be in the children's area and what kind of study things did you need. And that was my first time to get to furnish a library, and that was great fun. But Donna Van Noos, Gail, good library supporters.
Any last minute questions, comments, protests? Eileen can take a protest.
Not well, but she can do it.
It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
The first woman on the Allen City Council
And the last for a long time.
until Sharon Hamner.
Yep, till Sharon Hamner. Oh, funny story about Sharon. Our girls ran around together. And one day Sharon and I were talking and she said, where are you from? And I said, well, I lived in a little town in Arkansas, except for when in the Berlin crisis, my father was sent to Fort Benning, Georgia. And she looked kind of funny. And she said, oh, what year was that? And I told her. I said, yeah, I had a boyfriend. His name was Harold. She said, Harold Lane? I said, yeah. She said, you went to Baker High School? I said, uh-huh. She was from Columbus, Georgia, went to Baker High School, and also dated Harold Lane. So she and I had a lot in common.
Wonderful. Well, we always give a journal to our
Oh,
guests,
thank you.
So we hope you will record stories that you can
Oh,
share once,
okay.
once again, perhaps.
I use these. I have kept for at least 20 years a journal or journals. I record and summarize every book I read. And so I've got stacks of them. That's what this is.
Let me just allow 30 seconds. Tell us about what you did for your PhD dissertation.
Well, my husband and I had we took our daughter to California. And on the way back, we stopped in Phoenix. And he said, I was working on my doctorate, trying to decide what in the world I was going to do for a dissertation. And he said, we stopped in Phoenix, and he said, or in Grand Canyon. And he said, look over there on the bookshelf and see if you can find something about the Hopis. I said, okay. So I went and I said, yeah, there's some book here. But he said, I said, there's one about silversmiths. He said, look and see if they say anything about Sika. I said, Sika. That had been Bill's roommate in Nanking, China in World War II. And I said, well, spell it. He said, it's just the way it's said, Sika Kwaptewa. So I looked it up, and sure enough, it said Wayne Sika Kwaptewa moved back to the Hopi Reservation in 1965. Bill said, let's go find him. I said, where is it? He said, I'll show you. So we went, and we drove up to this store, and Bill said, get out and ask them if they know where Sika is. I said, no, I'm the woman. You get out. You're the man. There, you know. So he asked them, and they said, yeah, he's up at his house up there. He and his son, Phil, are working on the roof up at his house. Bill said, where's his house? He said, well, you go up here, so. So we drive up there, and we get out, and Bill walks up. They hadn't seen each other in probably 20 years. And Sika came down the ladder, and he said, yes, may I help you? I've never heard a colder voice in my life. And Bill said, Sika, don't you know who I am? He said, well, you've called me Sika, so that you must be from my military days. Oh, he called him Chief, said, Chief, don't you know who I am? Which is what you did with all the Indians right then, you know. That was not politically correct now, but he said, well, you've called me Chief, so you have to be from my military days. And he said, it's Tollett. He said, oh my God. He looked at me and he said, who are you? I said, I'm new. He said, well, come on in the house. I'll let you meet another new. And so that was what he said, you must stay. You must spend the weekend. My people are stomping. And I said, okay. He said, that means they're dancing. So we went to our first Hopi Kachina dance in the plaza of Second Mesa. And I saw that, and I looked at Bill, and I said, here's my dissertation. So I did my dissertation on the Hopi Kachina concept within that tribe. And that was how.
Wow. Here's your 30 seconds.
Yeah, there's my 30 seconds. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Barney is coming back next year.
Pardon me?
Barney is coming back next year with a new movie and a new TV show.
2024.
But what about Wishbone?
Wishbone
No,
was better.
Wishbone.
Wishbone was better than Barney.
Wishbone, she asked about Wishbone. I had just a teeny bit to do with Wishbone, but it was later, as I recall, like about 8-9 years later. And they did the filming out here, and they built a barn or something like that. It was all fake.
Lots along the railroad track.
Right. And I was more intrigued with the dog, and by the way, there was more than one Wishbone. There was like a whole set of dogs there, and
When I first finished my doctorate, I worked as a copy editor for DLM. And one day they brought me this book manuscript. It was horrible. And they said, look at it. I wrote all over it. It was one of the worst things I ever read. I don't remember, but I remember it was so horrible. And unfortunately, the person who had brought it to me was my supervisor, and the author was a friend of his. And they weren't real pleased with the way I wrote all over it. But I told them, I said, just read this thing. It's awful. And they decided not to publish.
Wishbone was only in Allen for about a couple of years. Mm-hmm. It was not a long. I loved it. This was such a novelty to Allen to have cameras and filming. So we would go out there during some of the sets and watch it being filmed. And I don't know if you've ever watched things being filmed for television, but they'll repeat it and they'll repeat it and repeat it. After about the seventh time I've seen the same thing going over, the dog jumping over something. Let's go back. This is enough. But it was such a novelty to have. Wishbone never came to the library. They were not involved with the community like Barney was. Barney was, and that was because of
That was because of Vern Lahart.
Vern Lahart,
Yeah.
the president of the company, was also on the library board. And so he made sure Barney came and interacted with the community, which we benefited from both financially, plus it advertised the library. But Wishbone was a different
Concept.
concept. And that may not answer your question, but they were not involved with the community. They did their own thing. They let us come watch being filmed.
That it? Everybody ready to go home, go to bed?